Então,
vou, então, lançar no YouTube.
tá bom. Avisa quando puder.
We are there.
Ok, boa tarde, pessoal. É um prazer estar aqui com vocês mais uma vez para esse encontro que traz tantas conversas importantes, tantas possibilidades de reflexão, de trabalho conjunto com pesquisadores de vários lugares do mundo. Dessa vez, a gente está trazendo a Mariam Seedat, que é também a pesquisadora da África do Sul, e que vai conversar com a gente hoje sobre questões de imigração. Eu vou falar em detalhes daqui a pouquinho, mas antes de começar efetivamente a nossa tarde, eu queria pedir que aqueles de vocês que não compreendem em inglês e que preferem assistir em português, que coloquem no nosso, aqui embaixo no nosso os comentários, e a gente vai oferecer o link do Zoom, que é para vocês poderem entrar. Talvez, Vivi, você pudesse colocar no chat, e as pessoas que preferirem assistir não só no YouTube, mas ouvirem em português, podem participar aqui no Zoom. Para as pessoas que estão no Zoom e querem ouvir em português, a ideia é que vocês entrem na parte de baixo do Zoom, onde diz interpretação, e coloquem o canal português. Colocando no canal em português, vocês vão ouvir a Mônica e a Lilian, que farão a interpretação hoje para a gente. Eu agradeço as duas por essa participação e pela colaboração que têm feito ao longo do tempo. Eu queria também agradecer a Cecília Magalhães, que está aqui com a gente, professora também do programa Lael, e que, como parte do nosso grupo, tem feito também muitas discussões e ofereceu hoje para a gente a possibilidade de usar o seu Zoom. So now I change into English, and I will start by saying that I'm very honored, very happy, I don't know, I'm really excited to have Mariam with us. Mariam Seedat Khan is a friend who became a friend last year, but I feel that she's part of our global network of people who want to change the world. And that is a lot. For me, it's the most important feature of anybody. She's a very warm researcher, a very caring person. And I think that this says a lot about the importance of what she's going to present to us today. But she's not only this, she's also a certified clinical sociologist in the School of Social Science at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, South Africa. She's a member of the UKZN later on she's going to say it correctly, Imbokodo steering, did I say it correctly? Right. Steering Committee Women in Leadership Programs. In 2020, she was named as UKZN Phenomenal Women by the Vice Chancellor. She's the founder and developer of SMART, Simply Managing Academic-Related Tasks, developed to assist students with learning disorders and related challenges during COVID pandemic. She's an active member of the International Sociological Association, ISARC 46, Clinical Sociology, South African Sociological Association, SASA, Working Group Convener, Clinical Sociology, a board member of the Association for Applied and Clinical Sociology, AACS, and a member of the Canadian Sociology Association, CSA. Professor Seedat Khan is a visiting professor at the Taylor University in Malaysia and Convent University in Nigeria. And now she's also part of this group with us, creating new possibilities for the world. It was through Mariam, that I learned about clinical sociologists, and also when I became more and more involved with immigrants. And our project now, the project that is entitled o Projeto Memórias de Migrantes na Pandemia, narrativas de resistências no enfrentamento do racismo, this was created because of her influence, because of her support. So I thank her very much, and I'm very pleased to introduce the topic of her presentation today, distinctive and continued phases of global South migration, human security, gender, geography, race, and class intersections. Thank you very much, Mariam, and I'm very, very, very happy to have you with our group. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Liberali, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure for being here. I'm sure we've just received some great news. Prof has received news from the editor that both her books are published. So congratulations to you from all of us here today. Well done. We're exceptionally proud of you. We have a philosophy in South Africa, born of the struggle, and essentially it means we are because of each other. And I really enjoyed preparing this presentation. However, there's so much to say, so I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to cover everything, because it's important for me to engage with my Brazilian colleagues and learn and share from each other. So I'm going to try my very best. So Belinda Johnson is a PhD candidate, and we've published together prior, and I think one of the articles were given to you as a pre-reading. So I've just put out some keywords to kick off my presentation. Xenophobia. So it is impossible to look at migration in South Africa without looking at xenophobia, violence, labor exploitation, particularly domestic work, systemic inequality like apartheid, which was separate development, the label, the Global South label, and the geography of where we are located in the world, race, and language. So I thought I'd start off with the type of sectors we see migrants, and my focus is particularly African migrants. So migrants that come into South Africa from the continent. So in South Africa, restaurant or informal or makeshift restaurants, bars, in neighborhoods are referred to as shebeens. They find employment or create businesses in hotels, camping sites. So there's a series of employment sectors that migrant workers occupy. And one of the reasons they occupy these sectors is a large portion of them are unregulated. So I'm from a province called KwaZulu-Natal, and there's a few key areas that I focused on. One is the education of the migrant child, or rather the exclusion of the migrant child in the education system. The number of migrants coming into South Africa and where they're coming from, and the rate at which the number of migrants are growing pre-apartheid, pre-democracy 1994 and post-democracy. So all our statistics of migrants, in my view, are guesstimates, because researchers have agreed that there are no accurate numbers, okay? So I've just done a snapshot for you looking at African migrants coming from the African continent between 5-year snapshots, and you can see between 2001 and 2006, African migrants to South Africa were just under 500,000. The next 5 years, we saw 550,000. And you see the exponential growth. There was a drop between 2016 and 2021. And while there's not enough conclusive or scientific evidence, we see that COVID fell between that time frame and we had borders that were locked down. So while 3/4 of all migrants come from South Africa, come from Africa, we see that we have migrants from UK and Europe, from Asia, and from other regions. Research and vulnerability focuses on Black African migrants from the continent. Okay, so Zimbabwean migrants account for 24% of all South African migrants, and guesstimated values of undocumented migrants range anywhere from 1.2 million to 1.5 million. And once again, these are not accurate because they're difficult to document. Right, so if we look at, so one of the other things I want to talk about is our views of the world, our stereotypes, and how we come to view the world through our significant others. We take on their views of the world. We're born tabula rasa. We learn to become members of society. We learn to become academics, mothers, daughters, friends. These are all learned behaviors. So how is it possible that there is a growing anti-migrant sentiment in the global South? And this anti-global migrant sentiment is directed at African and global South migrants. So migrants coming from the global South to the global South are at increased risk of vulnerability and exploitation than those coming from the North. So their ideas or their conceptions come from traditional or community leaders, from radio, and radio, the views of radio personalities, journalists are shared on television, newspapers, magazines, social media, personal experiences, political parties, all of which influence or shape how we think. So on the 16th of September in the year 2019, a prominent South African academic, Professor Lando, was invited to write an opinion piece in the New York Times. And what he did was he challenged South Africa's political leaders because they claim that violent acts of xenophobia was simply an act of criminality. So he disregarded this and challenged it and contested it. And he says that xenophobic violence is not irrational violence. It's not a popular revolt. It is an act that is rooted in the failure of South Africa's transformation. So while we dealt with colonization from the Dutch and the British, South Africa also then dealt with institutionalized systemic apartheid that separated people into 4 race groups. According to census classification, I'm categorized as Indian because while I have a German lineage and Indian lineage, they categorize people according to race. So South Africa's Institute for Security Studies, in their public violence monitor, reported 200 xenophobic attacks between the year 2013 and 2021 over an 8-year period. The African Center for Migration and Society at the University of Witwatersrand has a project called XenoWatch. And what their specific aim is to monitor xenophobic violence in South Africa. So what I'm going to do is I am going to share a short video to contextualize. Please let me know.
Let's move on now. South Africa is one of the most sought after countries in Africa. Thousands of people flock to the place from different parts of the continent to settle down in the Rainbow Nation looking for greener pastures. But in the last couple of months, foreign nationals, especially those without legal documentations, have been living in fear of being chased down back to their country or even being attacked. More details coming up in this next report. Take a look. South Africa's Institute for Security Studies said the Public Violence Monitor has recorded over 200 xenophobic attacks and related incidents over the last 8 years. It said the attacks were mainly fueled by the sentiment that foreign migrants are to be blamed for crime and unemployment, and the urge to make the undocumented people leave the country and push for jobs to be reserved for South Africans.
I'm afraid this fight because it's hard to us. If South Africa, they're going to want us to go back to home, because in Lesotho, there's no work, there's no job. It's easy to stay here in South Africa because there is job, nice one, then and salary, it was good. So that's why we came here, because of life is better here in South Africa.
The United Nations in South Africa, as well as South Africa's Human Rights Commission, say that the attacks on foreign nationals are worrisome.
Unfortunately, in recent times, we've seen various community groups and individuals rallying around the issue related to the presence of non-nationals within South Africa. It is of major concern to the South African Human Rights Commission, considering that just as recent as last week, we saw the untimely murder and death of Elvis Nyati, a Zimbabwean man who was resident in Diepsloot.
The African Diaspora Forum has called. Let's move on now.
Okay.
Let's move on now. South Africa is one of the most sought after countries in Africa.
Okay, so are you able to hear me again?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so that was just a brief indication. So if we look at the map, we will see we will be able to identify that every single one of us are migrants. I'm going to take you through a very brief timeline. So in 1994, we had the birth of our South African democracy and the demise of apartheid, where with Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress being the leading government party. So, but prior to 1994, there has always been an anti-migrant sentiment, okay, from indentured laborers that arrived in the 1860s to Mozambique and Congolese migrants who were expelled between 1984 and 1994. In 1998, post-apartheid, we saw Mozambican and Senegalese migrants attacked. They were attacked, locals citing high levels of unemployment, high levels of crime, and HIV, increased rates of HIV/AIDS resulted from a migrant presence in South Africa. In 1995, Project Buyela Kaya, which means go back to your home, was launched by local civil society members, and citing crime, high levels of crime, high levels of unemployment among local South Africans, and increase in sexual violence or sexual attack, blaming migrants for this. In 2001, we saw xenophobic murders in the Cape Flats. Residents, local South Africans, cited fear of foreigners taking property or owning property that rightfully should be theirs. In 2001, in a place called Zandspoort, we have many informal settlements or informal housing, makeshift housing, which we refer to as squatter camps. And Zimbabweans were given 10 days to leave this informal settlement. And they were, the perpetrators reported high levels of crime, again blaming migrants for high unemployment among locals. But what also happened is we saw the burning of homes and businesses looted before migrants were expelled. We then moved to a place called Olifantshoofbosch, where Zimbabwean migrants were killed, their homes were burned, their businesses were looted, and members of the community demanded that the police remove all migrants from the area. In 2006, we saw about 21 murders in the Western Cape. Somali migrants were targeted, and their businesses were sabotaged, and they were expelled as traders. Okay. Then between 2007 and 2008, Somalis, Zimbabweans, and Pakistanis were killed, their homes were burned, their businesses were looted. In 2008, we saw an increase in murders among focusing on Zimbabwean, Malawi, and Mozambique migrants. Scholars believe it was instigated by the then president Jacob Zuma. His campaign song Mshiniwami in Zulu translates to "Bring me my machine gun." So between 2009 and 2012, thousands of Zimbabwean farm workers were removed, and Somali businesses were shut down, burnt, and looted. Okay. In 2015, we saw the targeting of Muslims, Somalis, Nigerians, and Zimbabweans in the Eastern Cape, and thousands of families were displaced. 2016, we saw the Shwane riots. Shwane is in Pretoria. And again, we saw looting, foreign businesses attacked. 2017, we saw an anti-immigration march where a group of South African citizens marched to hand over a memorandum demanding the removal of migrants, citing crime and unemployment. In 2019, we saw what came to be known as both the Johannesburg and the Durban riots, where Nigerian businesses were looted and attacked. And in Durban, we saw the attack of foreign businesses. So come 2020, we saw the launch of Operation Dudula. Operation Dudula is another anti-migrant organization, which has been condemned by our president. And members of his political party have been slammed because they have supported this initiative. Dudula essentially is a vigilante organization, and they engage in illegal actions against African migrants. And our president has said that, you know, violence in any form always mutates into a wanton violence against other people. And so anti-migrant protests are proliferating in South Africa, and many of which are initiated by Operation Dudula. So Dudula is, again, a Zulu, isiZulu word, and it translates into forced out. So it's xenophobic objectives intensifies the human insecurity of migrants. I'm going to share another short 1-minute clip on the work that women migrants engage in.
I've been a domestic worker for almost 2 years now. It was the easiest job to find at the time. I work for a family of 3. I've been with them for almost 1.5 years now. My boss is a very complicated person. You don't know whether she's happy, whether she's sad. We spend the day together every day. We don't talk. Me, I'm a very talkative person. I'm a very people's person. I love talking. It's very difficult for me when I get to work and she's in a mood, I don't get to talk. Sometimes she places things like under the sofa or under the cushions. She comes when I'm done and she finds those things that she's placed the night before. And she calls you, did you clean this room? Then she says, you didn't because I placed this yesterday. We tolerate each other. I'm not well paid at all because of the economy. They see us as people who are not educated enough. You're treated like a slave, mostly.
So contextual and cultural, social capital that migrants possess offer us important intelligence on their opportunities for success and determining their agency within their lives in a new country. So while African migrants flee political persecution, escape armed conflict, violence, and flailing economies, there are groups of migrants who opt to come to South Africa. It is their preferred choice to invest in businesses or pursue an education. So, but if we look at continental African migration, we cannot negate or we cannot ignore the scramble for Africa by colonizers and how they sliced up the continent, creating their own colonial borders. Now, this is important in terms of our conflict and understanding violence and ethnic war on the continent, because it disrupted economic, political, religious, and cultural conventions that had survived hundreds of years on the African continent. So these distinct migrant categories or intersections, if you will, of race, of gender, of geography, of class, they continue to sustain colonial labor practices, exploiting unskilled migrants. So we saw this domestic work is a very colonial practice brought to South Africa by the colonizers and to Brazil by colonizers. Domestic work was initially the domain of men in colonial societies. However, when white women feared sexual attacks from Black males, they were moved out of domestic work and women were pushed into the domestic sector. Now, as men move out of sectors and women move in, and particularly for migrant, women are generally pushed into the lowest rungs of employment sectors. In the little clip that we saw earlier, the woman said, well, you know, that's the only job she could find. She's a skilled professional, but she was working as a migrant, as a domestic worker. So what are these idealistic pull factors in South Africa that bring people in from Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Lesotho? These pull factors in South Africa are brokered via colonial or colonized ideologies that sustain imperialist practices and systems. So the emphasis on the social capital that they come in, the support they have as groups of Ethiopians or groups of Zimbabweans or groups of Somalis, they help us understand why we're seeing an exponential growth of these migrants. So whether it is forced or voluntary migration from India, Africa, Europe, Asia, it is welcomed on the African continent because it helps sustain the practice of cheap labor and ultimately meets the goal of, with the fundamental of which is the pursuit for profit. So poverty, gender-based violence, human trafficking, they expose the absence of human security rooted in systemic colonial institutions. So significant social, political, and economic systems negate human security by their lack of application of universal rights. So migrants, particularly in South Africa, they face a racist separatism that they have not experienced in other African countries. They face exclusion in schools, marginalization. They are excluded from health services. They are subject to violence and xenophobia because of stereotypes that are reinforced. So documented, both documented and undocumented migrant patterns are propelled by financial gain. And the sustained global demand for cheap, unregulated labor, insecure labor, which is harsh and unrelenting, will always attract migrants, whether it is to the south or to the north. But political volatility brought about by xenophobia strips migrants of their agency, and it intensifies gender-based violence. We saw the statistics and the incidences of xenophobia for which migrants were at the receiving end through looting, through destroying their homes, through setting them alight. So there is a lack of compliance with universal human rights. We see its absence is pervasive. So the fact that migrants coming in from the global south, their gender, their social capital, their agency, and their resources, the amount of money they come in with, their educational ability to access education, it affects the migrants' class and position in South Africa. So all of these intersect to determine legal access to essential services that promote human security, which is significantly absent. In terms of housing, education, healthcare. So this makes them particularly vulnerable to the incongruous intentions of capitalism, sustained colonial practice, and systemic inequalities. So securing or establishing human security for migrants will ensure that they live a life free of violence. This is the contrary within our system, because systemic apartheid, high historical and continued levels of unemployment made worse by COVID-19, imposed on Black people, maintained white privilege in an apartheid society. So privilege and human security are incompatible with dispossessed African migrants. So if you are privileged, you have access to human security. If you are dispossessed and you don't have social capital or fiscal resources, you are unlikely to have achieved or have a right to access human security. So racialized, so what apartheid did, it racialized people into Indian groups, Asian, African, colored. And each of these have experienced different levels of violence. So stereotypes in South Africa are pervasive. Assumptions about people from different parts of Africa impact negatively. So stereotypes, poverty, high unemployment, exceptionally high unemployment, increasing daily with COVID, has made worse xenophobic sentiments. So imperial, patriarchal, fiscal, and ineffective sustained colonial laws work in support of migratory exclusion. So if we are to offer any form of human security, we need to mandate a significant realignment of existing prejudices that exist and become more of an inclusive, adopt an inclusive approach. So systemized normative compliance makes it impossible for migrants to establish themselves in a violent-free South Africa. Certainly not when you're having your home burnt down and your business looted. So the determination to escape geographic violence has led them to their South African migration, but they arrive here exposed to the same levels of violence, if not worse. So they confront this violence on two different levels. So the first is seditious political rhetoric and civil violence, which targets Somalis, Zimbabweans, Nigerians, exacerbated by xenophobic responses in terms of establishing themselves, their businesses or their professional status in a country to which they were not born. So the driving forces we saw, the statistics indicated, and the documentation of xenophobia, unemployment, poverty, and homelessness. There's an increasing number of unskilled, historically unskilled positions that the apartheid education system designed to feed African, Indian, and colored populations into. So domestic labor, farm workers, you're seeing an increasing number of migrants entering into these roles, possibly creating the sentiment that jobs are being occupied by migrants. So, and this, locals also attribute increased levels of crime to migrants. However, the data is contrary to these beliefs. These are stereotypical, unjustified, and they lack any scientific evidence, supporting evidence. So if we look at instinctual human responses to physical danger, livelihood threats, we see that it impels continental migration for one of two reasons. Accessibility and dire living conditions and intended for well-being. So migration requires physical and mental determination for the next generation, demanding significant sacrifice from the adult generation of migrants. So we know that migration rooted in fear, anxiety, and feelings of exclusion is made worse when they are forced to navigate xenophobia, xenophobic violence, systemic racism, patriarchy, that collectively undermines their success, their well-being, and their access to homes. So perpetrators of xenophobia or xenophobic violence play the role of the colonizers or the slave owners, metaphorically. Migration intensifies children's involvement in precarious exploitative work to supplement familial income. Statistics from South Africa found child migrants employed in unregulated domestic work, a colonial legacy locating women and now children at the lowest labor rungs. On the African continent, there are about 36 million child migrants, 10 million of which are refugees, and 1 million of which are asylum seekers. Again, these are guesstimates. So migration policy is a significant global challenge. It's fueled by demand for scarce critical skills and unskilled labor. There's a shift in the type of migration we're seeing. So lone children migrate in response to economic quagmires and geopolitical crisis. And South Africa has the highest number of lone child migrants or youth migrants. Historically, we saw male-led migration, which is now replaced by lone women and children who are migrating for education, economic opportunities, and professional development. So the changing nature of African migration is a resultant effect of human insecurity. I'm just going to play this on the Tudula movement.
South Africa is seeing another wave of anti-immigrant protests. They are mainly targeting foreigners from neighboring countries who came to South Africa without papers. The protests are driven by a new movement called Operation Dudula. Dudula means force out in the Zulu language, and it's creating fear amongst migrants in the country.
I'm so much worried that it might come to us. You know, it's so painful that We all Africans. And when I am here in South Africa, I'm from Zimbabwe, I'm here in South Africa, it's like I'm home.
No matter where are you from, as long as you are with the people, you are with your family. Let's live together as family. We must learn to share love.
They are killing us. For what reason? We don't know. They are taking everything. Oh, our money, we didn't bring nothing. Then they give us a job. We take our job for them. We don't know what is kind of people that can think like that.
For more on the xenophobia in South Africa, our Adrian Krish report from one of the anti-migrant protests in the city of Rustenburg.
We're angry and we're here to take care of the foreigners. This is what these South Africans sing in Zulu as they march through Rustenburg. The protest is organized by a group called Operation Dudula. The group says it wants to rid South Africa of undocumented immigrants.
I am ready for any eventuality. Whether foreigners think that they're going to take South Africa and make South Africans second-class citizens in their own country, whether they do it by politics, whether they do it through bribery or corruption, or they do it by the gun, we are waiting as South Africans because we are conscious enough to now understand what they're doing to our country. And with or without our political leaders, we the people will take the country forward.
Which means are justified.
In any means possible to save my life and other South Africans' lives. Where government can't get to, where law enforcement can't get to, we meet them halfway.
Members of Operation Dudula have been accused of attacking foreigners during previous protests. Some traders in Rustenburg pack up as the demonstrators arrive, but this time it remains calm.
Protesters here say they are targeting suspected criminals and drug traffickers, as well as businesses that are hiring foreigners without documents in order to pay them lower wages. But many foreigners living in South Africa are saying that operations like these are creating a climate of fear and xenophobia.
Some 4 million immigrants live in South Africa, according to government numbers. That's less than 10% of the population. But it's not known how many are here without papers. Many blame migrants for South Africa's problems of high unemployment, the soaring cost of living, and a rise in violent crime. Researcher Godfrey Mulaudzi says that's wrong.
If everybody was doing what they need to do, it could not be where we're at, where we blame problems that are taking place in the country to foreign-born migrants. So this, I think, it's issues that government has dropped the ball, and I think that's why you see the rise of social movement in the country. It's a vote of no confidence towards the political structure that is in the community.
To him, it's clear that movements like Operation Dudula are xenophobic vigilante groups.
If you speak about issues of undocumented migrants, that is not the issue of a vigilante group, of a mob, because that's what they are. That is the issue that the law enforcement, such as the police, Home Affairs Department, needs to take it up. So it does not give anybody a right as an individual citizen to go and knock at somebody's door and say, I want to enforce the law.
3 weeks ago, a mob killed a Zimbabwean gardener in Johannesburg. He was beaten and burned to death by a group wanting to control his papers. At a memorial service, his family says they had forgiven those responsible for his killing, but they still want the government to take action.
As a family, we feel saddened and we're shocked by the events after he had not done anything.
South Africa is seeing another wave of
Okay, so, right, so that's where thank you, Faye.
Mariam, first of all, I invite all our friends to open their cameras so we can cheer you for this amazing presentation. We thank you so much for the things you presented. I could feel we were in the same pace with what we have here. So now a round of applause, everyone, to Mariam. Woohoo! Congratulations, Mariam, for this. I think we are all moved. I felt so much about what you were presenting, mainly because I could relate, as we always say, we are countries that are so much alike, and the stories you were telling looked so much like the stories we have here. So, for example, we just, I don't know if you've heard, but in the beginning of the year, we had this migrant who was killed on the beach here in Brazil, Moses, and it was a very hard moment for us Brazilians because he was killed in a very violent way on the streets because he was asking for his money, and people just didn't give any support. On the contrary, they killed him. So I think that what you are presenting is very much in tune with what we see in Brazil, and I'm sure that everybody who is here is very much interested in now discussing a bit more. I don't know if can we have some time for questions, Mariam?
Absolutely.
Yes, so I will ask people to ask their questions, to say what they think, and I will invite those who want to please ask your questions, make your comments. Who would like to start? I don't know if Cisa would like to comment. Would you like to say something? How do you see it?
I'd like to say that it was very nice listening to you, Mariam. It is, as Fernanda has just said, we have similar problems here, and we have all this racism, everything, and the poverty growing on a lot here. So we have a terrible moment, and we are celebrating Paulo Freire's centenary anniversary. And now
100th anniversary.
Yeah, 100. And now it's very interesting because the situation of Brazil needs that we think and retake and discuss again all these things that Paulo Freire has done. And we have so many other researchers discussing these kind of things from Global South. So we are in a very bad situation, and there is a lot of things to do. Thank you for your talking.
Thank you. Thank you, Cisa. Yes, please, Mary.
Thank you. That's very important. And, I just want to touch quickly on these clinical interventions. So, we draft these clinical interventions by identifying the stakeholders, which are your teachers in school, your immigration officers, your Ministry of Home Affairs. However, the punitive measures, we saw the Institute for Security Studies, we saw the researcher Godfrey say to us that, it's a vigilante group, and, it's widely classified as a vigilante group by scholars, by our president, my social movements specialists. But here's the thing, while we can deliver this clinical model or this intervention of how it should be managed or how it could be addressed, when we have failure to deliver or forms of corruption within our system that are systemically disadvantage women and people of color and migrants, it makes our work all the more difficult.
That's right. Too bad. Marisol, would you like to talk a little bit about your research and how it connects to what Mariam said? If you prefer to use Portuguese, we can ask Mariam to change into, do you prefer Portuguese? Prefere português, Mari?
Falar em português.
Então tá, só um pouquinho. Mariam, would you mind changing to the interpretation? Ok. Então, Mari, por favor. Mona, também pode ir para o português.
Boa tarde, muito obrigada. Eu fico muito sensibilizada porque tem sido meu trabalho e meu foco de estudo com migrantes de crise. E aqui no Brasil nós temos muito bolivianos, né, que também sofrem racismo, que também não têm políticas públicas que atendam a demanda tão importante que eles têm. E me emociona saber como tem a potência, olhar e a sensibilidade de outras pessoas para olhar para essa comunidade que está no mundo tentando sobreviver. Então, eu tenho feito um trabalho numa escola com crianças bolivianas, das quais algumas foram vistas como autistas, porque a língua ainda é uma barreira, né? E como falta uma política pública que atenda à demanda da língua, que ainda é uma barreira importante. Então, o foco, nossa meta como grupo de estudo aqui, lideradas pela Fernanda, pela Maria Cecília, é justamente lutar, deixar escancarar essa necessidade de uma forma de respeitar a posição do outro no mundo e o direito à vida digna. É isso. Muito obrigada.
Mari, conta só rapidinho o que você fez com a escola, porque eu acho que aí ela pode também mencionar, né?
Certo. Então, com essa escola, com os alunos que foram vistos como autistas pela língua, eu acabei trabalhando com os professores também, para isso deixar de ser uma barreira, por meio da atividade social, trabalhando a língua, a linguagem, de uma forma da translinguagem e também com as famílias e a comunidade. Então, o projeto político-pedagógico foi traduzido, foi criado um grupo de WhatsApp, onde essa comunidade podia perguntar, interagir, esclarecer muitos pontos. Com as crianças, eu criei um livro bilíngue para garantir a participação das que falam português, das que falam espanhol, e dessa forma minimizar a barreira da língua. Então, no final, os professores acabaram criando um vídeo institucional falando da prática pedagógica do dia a dia das crianças bilíngue. Então, tem sido um trabalho. Sexta-feira eu vou lá para continuar e alimentar isso, porque para que isso cresça cada vez mais. Então, por exemplo, os locais da escola também já bilíngue, para os professores avisarem as crianças, venham ao comedor, vamos ao salão, para que eles possam entender que não sejam vistos com transtorno de aprendizagem ou por outras funções diversas. É isso. Muito obrigada, professora, é um prazer, fiquei sensibilizada, gostei muito, e conte conosco aqui também.
Obrigada. Mariam, would you like to comment or would you like to listen to some other person before?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Would you prefer to comment on Marisol, or would you like to listen to somebody else?
I think let me comment with to Marisol. Marisol, thank you. That sounds like such interesting work that you're doing, and I have one of the challenges that we're currently also working on a project with. We've just written something on exclusion of migrant children in South African school, and one of the problem is around the language barrier, and of course that impacts on both cognitive and physical development and the well-being of the child, and then the child's ability to learn, and exclusion and social skills and so on and so forth. But there are universal declarations to which Brazil and South Africa are signatories, and these are legally binding and ratifying documents that promote inclusive education and the rights of education irrespective of migrant status. Yet, as academics, I think there's still a fracture between those agencies, our civil society organization, our Section 27 companies, to help realize these kinds of things, or to make a difference, whether it's reuniting migrant families in one part of the country, or giving a child the ability to have language skills. Earlier, before this webinar started, one of the videos that I looked at, I was trying to see I thought, wow, I'm being so inclusive. I've prepared a slide so if there's any blind or hearing impaired delegates, they would still have access to the information. Little did I realize, my assumption was that every clip on YouTube has a translation to every language. It was a surprise. So unless we become inclusive like that, and technology makes it so easy for us to be, but we fail to prioritize, and we learn all the time. I learned today that it's not automatic that you can pull up Portuguese or Spanish. The only option it gave me was English. Thank you, Marisol. And I really love to read and hear more about your work and the barriers that the children face.
Great. Mona, would you like to comment as well? Mona also made a comment. Would you like to... Mona, você quer comentar, Mona? Desculpa, fiquei falando em português. Você gostaria de comentar sobre o seu projeto, o trabalho que você faz? Acho que seria bacana, né? Mona is a teacher at the State University of São Paulo. She teaches Arabic there. So Mona, please. She's a partner for us for many years.
Obrigada. Que bom ouvir um pouco falar sobre o trabalho da professora, né? Sobre a questão que ela trabalha com os imigrantes. É importante. Eu sou professora da USP, eu trabalhei bastante tempo na PUC com a Cecília, com a Fernanda, fiz o meu trabalho de doutoramento ali, trabalhamos muito essas questões, na época não tão fortemente sobre a questão do preconceito, da imigração, mas também, de uma certa forma, trabalhamos com questões das minorias, por um outro viés, mas esse sempre foi o foco, eu acho, que do trabalho tanto da Cecília, da Maria Cecília, quanto da Fernanda, essa preocupação muito grande com os trabalhos das minorias. E agora, trabalhando na USP, eu trabalho com o ensino do árabe, né? Sou descendente de árabes, sou filha de libaneses, e já estudei o árabe por um bom tempo, nunca pensei em dar aula de árabe, né? Então, como filha de imigrantes, eu já senti muito também na minha própria pele um pouco dessa questão da discriminação. E hoje eu trabalho muito a questão com os refugiados árabes e com os refugiados árabes, mas não são os árabes sírios, mas árabes também, muçulmanos também, de outras etnias, né? E essa questão que você traz da xenofobia, essa questão que você traz do preconceito, ele existe sim. Eu trabalho com adultos, mas a gente vê que a extensão, que a questão do preconceito, a questão de eles estarem na periferia, de eles serem vistos como pessoas não importantes, pessoas aquém da sociedade, isso é uma questão muito séria, é uma questão que eu não consigo lidar tão fortemente, talvez por falta de uma política, por mais que se fale em política pública, por mais que se fale em preocupação com os refugiados, em melhorar a questão da vida deles aqui, a aceitação, ainda a gente percebe que existe, sim, esse preconceito, e uma das questões que eles lutam hoje muito é simplesmente eles terem a oportunidade de conseguirem uma documentação aqui neste país. Então, assim, a gente está promovendo agora, atualmente, cursos de português para estrangeiros, com a única finalidade de eles conseguirem falar adequadamente para conseguirem fazer o exame do CELPE-BRAS, que consiga uma documentação oficial para que eles possam dizer, olha, eu tenho uma identidade, olha, eu sou estrangeiro, mas eu vivo aqui no Brasil com uma identidade, ou seja, eu sou como a maioria da população. Então, isso ainda é um problema muito difícil. Agora, eu trabalho efetivamente, Mariam, com a linguagem e trazendo um pouco dessa questão assim, de como é que eles, pela linguagem, pela produção linguística deles, como é que eles podem se relacionar bem numa cultura que não é deles, né? Então, aí entra um pouco essa questão que é muito interessante, de eles quererem fazer um pouco como os brasileiros, vamos dizer assim. Eles querem ser um pouco como os brasileiros para que eles sejam aceitos. Então, eles procuram saber gírias, como saber como falar isso, justamente para eles tentarem ser inseridos na comunidade, né? Agora, sim, eu, sinceramente, ainda existe um problema muito grande de preconceito, existe um problema muito grande de um olhar preconceituoso para essas pessoas, mesmo tendo discursos, palestras de que vamos receber os imigrantes, vamos receber os refugiados, trabalho mais com essa questão do refugiado. Então, essa sua palestra, esse seu trabalho de hoje, ele mostra um pouco, na minha visão, como ainda precisamos trabalhar muito intensamente com essa questão, mas assim, com várias políticas públicas, políticas de linguagem, para que haja pelo menos para que os refugiados, no caso da minha pesquisa, possam conviver, eles sendo refugiados e serem aceitos na comunidade, na nova comunidade em que eles estão inseridos. E um dos trabalhos que eu faço, e por isso que eu falei com a Fernanda, né, de participar também, é justamente trabalhar essa questão da linguagem, né? Então, como pela linguagem eles podem se posicionar, porque eu acredito que é pela linguagem que eles vão conseguir outras questões, mas é muito difícil para eles ainda se colocarem como pessoas em pé de igualdade, vamos dizer assim, conseguindo essas mesmas oportunidades. Então, o primeiro passo que eles acreditam que seja é conseguir a documentação oficial, porque pela documentação oficial, entenda-se uma documentação oficial para eles, uma identidade, porque muitos vivem escondidos, né? Vem, o prazo terminou, então eles vivem escondidos. Então, assim, tem grupos de nigerianos, grupos de africanos que, entre eles, é muito interessante ver, um protege o outro, mas assim, eles vivem escondidos com medo, eles não enfrentam, porque eles têm medo de serem descobertos e ter que voltar, ter que sair do Brasil, né? Então, assim, são refugiados, são pessoas, mas muitos estão ilegais no país, e ilegais porque eles não têm condição de saber como chegar à legalidade. Isso é um problema muito grande. Então, a gente vê na convivência como esses pequenos problemas, então, afetam. Então, no frigir dos ovos, assim, trabalhar essa questão linguística da linguagem, mas trabalhar outras questões mais, né, para que haja uma vida digna para eles, de refugiado, de estrangeiro, de imigrante, mas que haja uma vida digna também, que eles possam aparecer na sociedade, né?
Obrigada, Mona.
Acho que eu acabo falando bem mais do que o necessário, mas
não, somos professores. Mariam, I would like to add something to what Mona said, because one of the things that was intriguing for me was the fact that in South Africa, mainly with the Indians, people from India, you speak the same language. We face a lot of issues because we speak different languages, but people from India speak English, you speak English. So in a way, language issue and communicating doesn't seem to me as a problem, but as Mona said, for us, and Marisol also said, for us, the language is the main issue. Could you comment a little bit on this as well?
Okay, thank you, Mona, for that very interesting education. So, I mean, essentially, the human security is compromised of these migrants. And I think one of the ways in which the project that Fernanda and I worked on was around using an approach of citizen scientists, where we bring in children or young adults or even adult migrants and help them, work with them to provide part of the solution. We have very high levels of illiteracy in South Africa. We also have several languages, different vernaculars. There's isiZulu. There's many languages, you know. And we now have added South African Sign Language as an official language. So there's definitely a disconnect. So while Zimbabwe has a reputation of high levels of literacy, and Zimbabwean migrants, Nigerian migrants are they're proficient in English. However, migrants from Malawi are not have difficulty speaking English. So there is a disconnect, the lack of assimilation into South African culture. So and I know you have something like this in Brazil as well, these informal housing settlements made with makeshift kind of material, and people live in these communities. So our migrants, because they don't have these documentations to sign a lease, or they don't have the resources to sign a lease or get an apartment, they live in these spaces. Yet at the time of civil unrest, or at the time of natural disasters like we've had in our province with flooding, the migrants are the first to be marginalized, whether it is with aid or assistance. And also there's this element of fear or prejudice because, like Mona said, they're on the peripheral. They're living in fear of not wanting to get caught, or the possibility of deportation because they don't have their documents in place. And all of these compromise well-being. And Mona mentioned something about working with Muslim migrants. There is a further prejudice against Muslims because of the global sentiment that was perpetuated by Trump across the world, and makes it even worse for them and compromising their but we still have the same problem. And I think at the end of the day, it's about learned behavior, isn't it? We're being socialized. COVID has re-socialized us all into how we operate.
That's right. Anyone else would like to ask a question? Lari, Larissa, or yes, please, Lari.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you, Mariam, for your presentation and for teaching us so much about your work. I would like to ask you, if possible, for you to talk a little bit about older people and immigration, or migration in crisis. I've come across a recent paper on the situation of older people in Ukraine because of the war, and how we have, for example, young people leaving the country and doing whatever they can to carry their dogs, their cats, their pets, but leaving their parents behind, older people. And it seems to be a humanitarian crisis that we don't talk so much. What happens to older people in these situations when they can flee the country in crisis, if they can, and which kind of assistance we can add. So I'm sorry if it changes a little bit. The discussion is just because I'm very interested in ageism and how older people are overall treated. And so if you could comment a little bit on that, I would appreciate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Larissa. Yes, that is an important question. So in South Africa, we have something called black tax, or I would say it's something pervasive on the African continent. So old age homes or institutional nursing homes for elderly family members is exceptionally uncommon in South Africa among all race groups, because the history, I think the history of marginalization and inequality forced families to live together within extended systems for protracted periods of time. So what we're seeing is migrants coming from Zimbabwe, Malawi, Somalia. It is a younger generation coming. So it is people that have young children, and it comes across very clearly. They're making the move for the generation that follows. And I think I mentioned that in the presentation. And there's huge sacrifices on the part of the first generation or the adult migrant parents or guardians. But what is happening, and this is quite I don't have the facts on me right now, but the amount of money that is sent back to the home country is significant. So with regards to older generations, like older parents and grandparents, in some of our work, we found that, they don't have the physical and mental capacity to make the difficult journey. But there is those links are still very much maintained, and there is still that familial responsibility on the part of the migrant that's here in South Africa, earning an income and sending money back home to take. We have a very, very small, it would have to be within, I suspect, refugee groups of migrants that arrive here from the African continent. But our statistics show very few senior or adult. But what I can do is put you in touch with somebody that's working in that field here in South Africa at our university.
Thank you. That will be wonderful.
Eu posso só fazer um acréscimo, Larissa, e que existe uma coisa que é um pouco cultural. A maioria dos idosos, eles não vêm. Mesmo os refugiados, eles preferem ficar lá. Isso é uma coisa cultural. Por duas questões. A primeira delas é deixar a terra onde nasceram, e a segunda é o medo de morrer e ser enterrado num país que não é dele, na sua pátria. Isso é muito forte. Eu vejo isso pelos meus pais, que faleceram já, mas é que era uma angústia muito grande do meu pai, depois da minha mãe, de voltarem para a terra onde eles nasceram. Era uma necessidade. O último momento da minha mãe é que ela não conseguia mais ficar aqui, porque ela estava doente, então ela queria, de toda forma, viajar, porque ela queria morrer no seu país. E conseguiu. Graças a Deus, conseguiram morrer lá na aldeia onde eles nasceram, foram criados, e estão enterrados perto um do outro. Tá. Mas existe isso. E aí, o refugiado, a outra preocupação do refugiado com o qual eu convivo, eles precisam arrumar um emprego de qualquer forma, um emprego, porque eles têm a obrigação moral de mandar para os pais. Então, às vezes, quando eu vou trocar dinheiro, quando eu vou para esses Western Union, o que eu vejo de gente trocando, enviando $100, $50, por que seja, porque eles têm essa necessidade. Então, você não vê muito a questão dos idosos por essas questões. Então, acho que a questão de não largar o país em que vive, mesmo que eles vivem em condições ali precárias, para eles é mais humano e mais digno do que morrer num lugar estranho. numa cultura que não é a dela, numa cultura em que a questão religiosa é forte, como vai ser enterrado, tudo isso é pensado. Como vai ser enterrado? Se ele for um árabe, se ele for muçulmano, o enterro precisa ser diferenciado. Isso é muito... Eu acho que a Mariam, não sei qual é a origem, mas eu acho que se ela... eu sou de origem muçulmana. Então,
I am Muslim, so yeah, I understand, absolutely.
Então, Ana Muslima, né? Então, assim, é muito sério isso, é uma questão muito séria, de às vezes eles preferirem morrer lá, passar fome lá, do que viajar para um país que não é o país dele. Então, essa questão da cultura, essa questão do pertencimento ao lugar é uma questão que impede realmente o idoso. Além desse fator idade, cansaço, mas é uma questão muito importante. Eu queria deixar colocado...
Se eu puder fazer um comentário, desculpa, vou fazer em português.
Tá.
Se eu puder fazer um comentário, sem dúvidas, eu acho que isso é um elemento importante, mas eu acho que isso também diz respeito à nossa dificuldade de criar assistências que criem a possibilidade de que um idoso imagine que é possível viver de uma forma digna em um outro país. Então, eu imagino que exista, sim, uma questão cultural, mas existe também uma questão de um certo preconceito etário em termos de constituir políticas de assistência e de acolhimento de pessoas que não vêm para o país com possibilidade de trabalho. Eu acho que isso é um aspecto importante quando a gente pensa, por exemplo, em situações de guerra clara, e essa notícia que eu comentei com vocês traz dados sobre isso, de quando não existe assistência de apoio aos idosos que estão nos países de guerra, na mesma proporção que existe assistência para as crianças, né, e para os adultos. Então, é como se eles fossem realmente disposable, né? Então,
eles não trabalham com essa possibilidade. Talvez você... Muito bem lembrado, muito boa a sua colocação aí, dessa falta de assistencialismo mesmo para essa faixa etária. Muito importante. Isso é muito importante, realmente. Talvez abra possibilidades, talvez.
Muito obrigada. I think that Chris also, can you still answer one more, talk one more so Chris can participate, Mariam? How is it for you?
Yeah, no, I'm okay. I think those are very important areas, and Larissa makes and Mona make an important points, because I'm not sure if Brazil has received many refugees from the Ukraine, but you know, sometimes there are no choices in terms of age, and the age consideration or ageism must be built into the prejudice or the marginalization. And thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Thank you. Cris, so it's...
Oi, vou falar em português. If you guys want to change to the interpretation to listening in Portuguese, it's better for me in this moment. Bom, primeiro eu queria agradecer, aprendi muito aqui com vocês. O meu projeto, né, junto com a Fê, é sobre imigrantes, então, para mim, todas as informações, ainda saber de outros territórios e ver também, realmente, é o que a Fê falou, né, as similaridades que a gente tem com o que acontece aqui, a gente vê que tem uma grande luta pela frente, e a gente tem, bom, a Fê também comentou com vocês que a gente tem um projeto grande, né, que é o Memórias de Migrantes na Pandemia, narrativas de resistência do enfrentamento do racismo. E aí, dentro desse grande projeto, a gente tem subprojetos, e um deles, que é o que a gente está... Vocês falaram bastante também sobre a questão das mulheres, e a gente quer falar sobre o poder didático das escrevivências a partir da narrativa de mulheres. Então, escrevivências, eu não sei se esse termo é comum aí para vocês, mas são histórias escritas a partir de histórias reais mesmo, né? Então, todas as histórias são elaboradas a partir de histórias reais que a gente tem escutado. E a gente está bem animado com o andamento desse subprojeto, né? Que os dados têm sido coletados aí de maneiras diversas. A gente fez visitas a locais em que imigrantes trabalham aqui na cidade de São Paulo, onde a gente mora. A gente fez rodas de conversa com o apoio do Brincadas, que também é um projeto que é liderado pela Fernanda. Eu não sei se vocês conhecem, acho que depois ela pode até contar um pouco sobre ele. E entre outras iniciativas, sempre para colher esses dados. E a partir dessa coleta, dessas informações, a partir do que eles falaram e contaram para a gente, o nosso grupo ele criou histórias, que a gente chama de escrevivências, e além das escrevivências, a gente também recriou performances desses grupos, com dessas pessoas, a partir dessas histórias, e a gente tem trabalhado essas performances, essas histórias, com grupos de professores, estudantes, comunidade, sempre com esse objetivo de aproximar as histórias, que são reais, né, do maior número de pessoas possíveis. Então, é um projeto nosso que, enfim, estou aqui compartilhando com vocês também, para que a gente possa estar sempre conectados aí. Obrigada, gente. Parabéns pelo trabalho.
Thank you, Christiane. That is absolutely fascinating. I love lived experience or autoethnographies because I think from a qualitative perspective, you get so much out of it. So well done on that. But what's more exciting for me is your use of, was it theater? Did I get you right? Is it plays, performance, plays? Two
things, Mariam. I think that the girls had a hard time to translate because that's a Brazilian coined word. It's escrevivência. It's live through experience, through writing. You write
lived experience, right?
You write lived experience. So it's right. A term that was coined by one of our great Brazilian authors.
Right, we use that too.
You use this escrevivência,
so yeah. No, but my question was about the theater. Was that the right? So now that's something we haven't seen, right? So you would go to the theater and you'd be able to see these experiences or these lived experiences. And I mentioned autoethnographies because Christiane said that they shared their stories from their viewpoint, and then it was written up. So taking it to the theater is a real way of assimilating or including people or making them feel like part of the society. So that is very innovative. But the conditions, the social conditions are so dire in terms of access. And of course, COVID has compromised everything in terms of access. At one point, undocumented migrants didn't even have access to a vaccine.
That's true. It's the same. Also, it's the same. It's such an unfair society, an unfair world, an unfair. It's what Larissa said. It's those who are disposable, or in the necropolitics of what we are going through. Those that are considered, I mean, they can die. It's not important, but at the same time, they are necessary to do the jobs that nobody wants to do, or to get low salaries for doing enormous things. So it's very sad. There is, I think. I would like to, Valentina asked the question or made a comment. I don't know if you want to say it, Valentina, or if you want to comment. You can read, Mariam, here.
Yeah, so my family.
It's a comment.
It's a comment. I was going to mention just one thing and then we can conclude. I don't know if other people have questions, but I would like to mention something. Many times when you were presenting and when I was reading your text and I heard this idea that they should send the people back to their countries. And we have just had the release of a movie film about, it's called Medida Provisória. I'm not sure how it's called in English. I know it has got abroad already, but I don't know how it's called. But Medida Provisória is exactly about the world some years from now, and there is a new Brazilian law in which all Black people are going to be sent back to Africa in general, no matter where they are from. So they start sending people to Africa, and then there is resistance here in Brazil for those who don't want to go. And it's a crazy world, of course, in the future. But
the executive order.
Yes, it's very executive order, that's it. And it's very good because it is the materialization of what these people are asking for. Because, and it's funny because it starts with talking about people that are, I mean, colored, but little by little, they realize that sometimes those who wanted the law to be inflicted on others have the law inflicted on themselves. Because who decides who is Black and who is not Black in this society, and who is going to be sent away and who is going to stay? So I think that the discussion there is enormous, and also the educational aspect of this is essential, because I always think that the oppressed should unite and not fight against one another. But it's very good that all the poor South Africans are fighting against the immigrants, because then while they do it, those who are really in charge of what's going on, they are never being charged of the real problems. So I like the film very much, and I think that what you said today is resonates very much with this film.
Absolutely. I think the fracture between policy and practice and law and punitive or penalties is so severely damaged because of poor ethics in our country. Yeah. And I know you experienced the same in Brazil. So I think as social scientists, as clinical sociologists, we still have a long way to go. And if Ukraine has taught us anything, it has taught us that we are all vulnerable, and the imperialist pursuit of power wins at the end of the day at the expense of human life.
That's right. Okay.
I want to thank you for having me.
I want to thank you so very much, Mariam. It was such an amazing moment with you, with the discussion, with the things you raised. I can't thank you enough. And I hope that this is just the beginning of a long-term conversation. I saw that you are an invited professor in many different places. Who knows? I hope to have you here physically in the near future.
That would be nice. That
would be great. Then we would visit the communities, and it's going to be a great opportunity for us to share and be closer and work closer. So thank you very much. And I give you the floor to say your last words, and then
thank you for having me. I've shared my email. I'd love to have your email. So we've launched a clinical sociology postgraduate program in South Africa at the university I am at, and I really would love to have you, engage with our students and transatlantic engagements, opportunities for funding. So please feel free to email me, and I'm very interested in hearing about your research and the outcomes of your research. And for those of you currently working on studies, I wish you everything of the best. And wish you success. And like Faye says, this is not the end. This is just the beginning of collaboration and partnerships.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your book once again.
Yes,
Once
the
again.
2 books are going to be released.
Fernanda.
Hã?
Já estou pensando em viagens, em intercâmbios,
sim, nós vamos para... We are going to South Africa to visit Mariam and her group in the future.
You're welcome.
So I will say goodbye to the people on YouTube, and I will ask Mariam if she can stay a little bit more, and for all of you to open your camera so that we can take our official photo. We take a photo of everyone. So now, Vivi, cadê você? Cadê todo mundo? Vamos lá, gente. Luciana, não vem? Luciana está em aula. Vamos lá.